wondered how best-selling memoirs like Educated by Tara Westover, Wild by Cheryl Strayed managed to tell this compelling, amazing story, and the person was not famous. They wrote that memoir like a novel. Today, I'm going to take you through my process to plot your memoir and write it like a novel. Because the thing about memoir is that it's creative nonfiction, and you need to follow the creative devices and techniques used in fiction writing and novel writing, but you also must pay attention to particulars of the memoir genre. And this 6-piece process is going to cover all of that. If you're completely new to me, my name is Louisa. I'm an author. I've written 2 memoirs. I teach writing and memoir publishing because I believe that memoir is one of the most widely misunderstood category of literature. I know it was for me when I was trying to write both my books and sell them to publishers. So this process that I'm going to take you through is something that I've used to write both of my memoirs so that they read like novels, and is a story process that I teach in my program, The Art of Memoir. But it's really simple. It's the 6 pieces that you need to include. I call it the story star codes because it's formed like a star and they all work together to create your incredible, compelling book. So the first piece of this process is you need a hook. Every fiction novel needs a hook, and so does every memoir. This is where you open the story. This is generally the problem that the main character has to solve. And because it's a memoir, that main character is you. So the hook is the first piece that you need to plot your memoir like a novel. The second piece that you need is a promise. And this is also known as the basic premise. I call it the promise because it is the promise of change. So if you look at something like Dry by Augustin Burroughs, yes, the hook was he was very intensely alcoholic, but even the title of the memoir conveys that promise of change, Dry. It's about getting dry. That is the promise. That is the goal of transformation at the end. The third piece that you need to plot your memoir like a novel, to write your memoir like a novel, is type. This is so important. So this is where plotting your memoir like a novel is going to be different to writing a fiction. Now with type, as I said earlier, I believe that memoir is one of the most widely misunderstood and mistaught categories in writing and publishing and books and literature. And this is why I'm so passionate about educating people. So with type, you need to be aware of the conventions and the market category that your memoir will be sitting in, because this is going to inform how you structure and plot and write the book. For example, with my second memoir, A Letter from Paris, which was also a biography of my late father, it involved a lot of history. It was, in essence, a memoir, but the subcategory of that, which is type, it was a family memoir, a history memoir, a biographical memoir. And this helped me to find comparative titles and stories and memoirs that had been published in that area that I could then sit alongside, see my particular memoir sitting alongside. I think that type is probably the most important one if you've never written a memoir before, because you can get very specific with your type and it's going to help you so much with the structure and the writing of your book. So the fourth piece of this is actually a 6-piece process that I teach, and it's the story star codes. I call it the story star codes because it's formed like a star and they all work together to create your incredible, compelling book. And it's about a story. The fourth piece of writing your memoir and plotting it like a novel is you need friction. Now, this isn't just a conflict that you face on the journey, that your main character faces on the journey. And this is where I also see so many memoir writers, particularly first-time memoir writers, getting the plotting part wrong. And this is why you will end up with only 40,000 words, for example, for your manuscript, when you need at least 60 to 70,000 if you want to sell this as a memoir. For example, Wild by Cheryl Strayed was over 100,000 words. So if you want to compel a reader and if you want to engage yourself and have enough to write about for 80 to 100,000 words. My first memoir was over 100,000 words, and A Letter from Paris was 85,000 words, roughly. If you want to compel a reader to keep going past the initial hook, the initial promise, you will need a very good understanding of how this friction needs to work in the way that you pace your story. And this is similar to how you would structure a novel, because you would be driving towards something in the beginning and then that would change about the midpoint of the story. So that's how you would use this friction piece that I teach to plot your memoir like a novel. And that is very deep and intense when it is memoir, because it's about you and it's about your own, often very unconscious blocks. And so it's a lot easier to write a fiction novel with this friction and this conflict piece, because it's not something that we can't see about ourselves, which is often what drives a memoir forward. The fifth piece of this, and this is something that I teach uniquely because I'm really into psychology, self-development, and Jung. I love Jungian theories of psychology. And I believe that it's very powerful in terms of helping you to see your story from an objective point of view. The fifth piece that you need to plot your memoir like a novel is you need an understanding of character and a character's function in a story and a story's structure. And when you understand archetypes, so mythic archetypes, and how they play out in every human life and every character change and development, this really helps you to plot your memoir like a novel and understand what needs to be included in this particular story and not write it like a life story or a complete birth to death autobiography, which is not a compelling readable memoir if you're not a celebrity. So archetypes are really important, and you also need to be able to see how that main character functions on, which is you. This is the most important piece. You need to be able to see how the main character, you, function on that archetypal and mythic level, and how you will be read, how you will be perceived by the reader. The last piece of this is how it brings it all together, and this is your story structure. So the story structure, I teach what I call an evolutionary story structure, and it involves the hero's journey, it involves the 3 acts, and it also involves a lot of, as I said, Jungian theory and character development and personal development and personal growth work. Because I see the hero's journey, I don't see it as a gender thing. I don't see it as masculine or feminine. It is basically the path to self-actualization, the way that I teach it. And you use this in the way that you structure the story. And this is exactly what Wilde did. This is exactly what Educated did. This is exactly what those fantastic memoirs that you can't put down because they read like a novel, and many of them have been made into movies because they're so compelling. They all use this mythic and very human story structure in that path to the main character's self-actualization and attainment of that promise set up at the beginning of the story. This is, in a snapshot, the 6 steps that you need to plot your memoir like a novel and to write it like a novel. You need a hook, you need a promise of change, you need to understand type and category in the publishing marketplace, you need a depth of understanding how to pace the friction over the course of 60 to 80 to 100,000 words so that the reader is still compelled to continue reading after the first, say, 3-4 chapters. You also need to understand character archetypes and how you are identifying certain characters in the story, particularly yourself as the main character. You are the driver of the action in this story because it's a memoir. So a really deep understanding of archetypal character functions in a story structural perspective. And lastly, you need to understand compelling story structure from that self-actualization perspective, which I teach as the hero's journey and the three acts, and Jungian and Maslow theory of self-development and human self-actualization. The reason this story structure works so well, if you join my program, you'll start to see it in everything. Once you know this process, you'll see in every Hollywood movie, every story, even and the way that people present certain compelling stories in social media, you will start to see these stages play out, and you'll understand why you are so compelled to keep turning the pages. And it's because it functions on a mythic level and an unconscious level, and it's these areas where humans are all the same, much more than they are different. And that's something that I want you to take away from this, is not that your memoir and your story is not unique. We are all unique. We are all incredibly limitless and applicable and divinely limitless and have so much potential in our lives. But if you understand how these 6 pieces play out, you will start to see how your story, even among a crowded marketplace of 50 to 100 to 1,000 stories on the same topics and themes, is so different, because your experience of moving through those stages is different, and your experience of actualization is different. But the way that human psychology works is the same, and we all want the same things: health, safety, freedom, and peace. It's just the way that we go about them and the way that things play out on an unconscious and a conscious level changes from human to human. But the symbols and the collective unconscious patterns and programs and processes are the same. So this is the 6-piece process that I teach to plot your memoir like a novel and write it really well. I call it the story star codes because it's formed like a star and they all work together. It has helped me to write both of my books in months, not years, and it's used by so many compelling and transformational memoirs that you will never forget. And it's helped my students too. The main thing here though is you understand that story plays the same way from human to human. It's just the individual unique aspect of that is going to change, and that is where you're going to find your unique hooks, and you are going to follow this path of actualization in the process of writing it too. So if you'd like to know more about this 6-piece stories star code process, I teach it in depth inside my signature program called The Art of Memoir.